last day. Are you feeling a little sad about that? I mean, I'm kind of feeling a sense of like, ugh. So I'm very sad about this, but we still got an afternoon of amazing presentations. So we have a video to introduce our next speaker who doesn't really need an introduction. Let's roll it.
If you still believe you have an obligation to bow, then you're like, come take it. And they say, that's illegal. And you say, okay, you can have it. We have voted to kill you and take all your stuff. The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. And when a tank doesn't have a tank driver in it, it's not really a threat to us anymore. When we don't let them have control of our brains, then they don't have control of our bodies. Thank you very much. I often use analogies to try to communicate ideas. This is an analogy. Ow, ow. Yo, dude, are you okay? Oh, yeah, I twisted my ankle. Oh, that hurts. Oh. Oh, man, that sucks, dude. Do you need help? What are you going to do about it? Well, I don't know, I guess, you know what they say, I got to go home and light my hair on fire. What? No, what are you talking about? Your ankle, you twisted your ankle, what are you going to do about that? Well, in my family, I was always told if you twist your ankle, the thing to do about it is to light your hair on fire. That's the solution. That's what my family has always done. I've always heard it from all my siblings my entire life. So that's what I'm going to do. I mean, what would you do? What's your solution? Well, I don't know. You could put ice on it, bandage it, maybe go to a doctor. What do you mean light your hair on fire? Like, whatever you do, that's not going to solve it. You're going to still have a hurt ankle and your hair is going to be on fire. Well, can you guarantee that the things you just described are going to fix my ankle? Well, I can't guarantee it, but it's pretty likely. I can guarantee lighting your hair on fire is not going to help. No, you have no solutions. It sounds too kooky. I'm gonna do what we always know is the solution to things. So, thanks for your help, but no thanks. You're kind of an idiot. Have a nice day. In this crowd, let me see how many people knew what that was an analogy to. Most of you. When this video gets posted publicly, most of the world would look at that and say, are you out of your gourd? What is wrong with you? Nobody would ever do that. That discussion would never happen. That discussion would never happen in that setting. However, on a daily basis, I have discussions with people that feel that stupid because they are that stupid. And the other side sounds a little bit like this. Yo, dude, did you hear about that flood down south? There's like thousands of people homeless and their houses are destroyed and they're trying to rebuild stuff and they're trying to get food around and there's still some people like stranded that they're trying to rescue and stuff, and it's just so sad to watch. Yeah, I know, it's just horrible. It's horrible, my heart goes out to them. Yeah, I know that, the local supermarket, I think, is taking collections to send things down, and we can do what we can, and, that's what we got to do. Well, I don't know. I really think that what we have to do is get a small number of people who have the moral right to violently dominate the rest of us and take our stuff. What? No, the floods, you heard about them, right? We need to, help. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? You want somebody to rob us and take our stuff? How would that help? Well, we have this group of people, they violently dominate us and take our stuff, and then we ask them nicely to take some of what they took from us and give it to the victims of this flood. So it's still our money. Why don't we just give money to the victims of the flood? Why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense. Well, this is how it's done. This is how it's done. And I don't necessarily trust people to be generous with their own. Oh, okay. So it isn't your money. It's not. You're not quite dumb enough to appoint a thug to rob you to give your money. It's you want to take somebody else's money and give it away and feel good about that. Well, I happen to think that's totally immoral, but setting aside the immorality of doing that, isn't your idea still sort of stupidly inefficient? Why don't you just take a gun and go rob somebody, like some rich person? I'm guessing that's who you're talking about. Go take a gun and rob somebody and give some money to the poor people. Again, I think that's immoral, but I mean, wouldn't that be more practical than your solution? Well, no, I would never do that. That's bad. That's robbery. That's evil. That's completely immoral. No. I want somebody else to do it for me, and then it's perfectly fine. It's in what way is it perfectly fine? Well, we vote on it, and we let the rich guy vote too. So it's democracy, and it's representative and all that. Oh, okay, so gang rape, where the gang lets the woman have a vote, and she loses, but the outcome's okay because everybody had a vote. Oh, come on, now you're just being extreme. Like, I would never do that. This is how statists actually think, and it's how they actually can't see what they are advocating, and they've been taught to view things this way. And there are a bunch of other examples I could give. I may give an abbreviated one of, hey, I have a cousin who's, been addicted to hard drugs, and it's been really sad to see, and, a few of us want to talk to him and see if we can help out, and, obviously first he has to admit that there's a problem. We can't force anything on him, but it's sad to see, and we're trying to help out. Well, I think what we need is a small group of people that has the moral right to violently dominate the rest of us and take our stuff. Statists do this with everything. Government is the one wrong answer to absolutely every problem in the world. And the most ridiculous example of that is also the most common example of it, and it goes like this. Whoa, did you hear about Bob, the guy who lives 2 streets over? Last night, someone broke into his house and took a bunch of his stuff. They wrecked the place and stole a bunch of his stuff. He was actually home, and they threatened him, and he was scared, and he hid. They didn't kill him, they didn't hurt him or anything, but he was scared. This is his own house. That's got to be traumatic. And they ran off with a bunch of his stuff, and that's just, I don't know, maybe we need like a town watch or something, or keep other people's numbers handy or something to help out. No, I think what we need is a small group of people that has the moral right to violently dominate the rest of us and take our stuff. Were you not listening? That was the problem, is a small group of people that uses violence to beat us up and take our stuff. Well, yeah, but what we need is a different small group of people that bosses us around and takes our stuff, and then we can ask them nicely to please hire somebody to stop anybody else from beating us up and taking our stuff. That is the fundamental basis of statism. It's stupid, it's insane, and I believed it for many years, and that's embarrassing as hell. And what's saddest of all is that the ones who think they are most pro-freedom, and this was also me a couple decades ago, who think they are most pro-freedom and righteous are minarchists, which is what I was. I only want a little government that only bosses us around and beats us up and takes our stuff to protect us from those who would boss us around and take our stuff. As if that's sane, as if that makes any sense. Nobody would come up with these solutions on their own. Nobody would believe something so patently stupid if they were not subjected to years and years and years of indoctrination that tells them that that is how you deal with the problems of humanity, getting a violent ruling class to boss us around and take our stuff. But that is a literal description of absolutely everything that government does. It is the wrong answer to absolutely everything. But this is the paradigm that's still in most people's heads. It is what they are brought up with. It is what they see. It's what they get from their parents and their teachers and society and the TV and government and the media and movies and everything around them. They think it's normal. I used to think that trying to get people to see the insanity of government was analogous to a cult deprogramming, until I realized it's not analogous. It is. It is a cult deprogramming. It's just the cult has 7 billion members, so it takes a little more effort to get people to see how insane it is, because they are surrounded by people who have been taught to believe the same lunacy. And if you just look at the big picture, like you back up, the guy who said, well, we need government to tax us to help with flood relief. You back up and you see the picture. All right, here's a big map of the whole world or a country or whatever size you want it to be. There's lots and lots and lots of people in there. What does government add? It doesn't add any resources. What it gives away, it takes from somebody productive first. It doesn't add any technology, doesn't add any know-how. All it adds is violence. But people have this Santa Claus view of reality of, well, we normal people could never afford to help people out. Like if there's a big flood and all these houses washed away, we can't afford it. But for some weird reason, we can afford to have those people steal our money, waste most of it, and then pay for it. But people have this weird contradiction in their heads where and there's a lot of examples, where they know something quite clearly, but they're trying really hard to not know it. It's like active delusion, willful ignorance, where if you ask people, well, where does government get the money to help these people to pay for this or that, most people will eventually figure out, well, from taxation. Well, then don't ever say we can't afford it. We're paying for it either way. It's just whether we get to choose or we get robbed by a bunch of thugs and then they waste our money. But people have this twisted, demented view as if it's actually Santa Claus, as if this thing called government has superhuman rights and superhuman abilities and superhuman resources, when all it is some human beings who are nasty and violent. But we are trained to think this way. We are trained to view reality that way. When you're the little kid in school and you sit there quietly and you do as you're told, you are learning above all else there are two very different kinds of people. They may look like the same species, but there are obeyers where it's never your job to solve any problem. And if you do, you get in trouble. If you defend yourself, you get in trouble for fighting. Doesn't matter who started it. If you try to handle anything else, no, that's bad. You go to the teacher, you go to the authority figure, and they will tell you the solution, and they will tell you what to do. And then you grow up, kind of, but really not. You don't grow up, you just get bigger. And then they say, if you have a problem, you dial 911. You ask the authorities to handle the problem. And it makes people perpetually childish in their mentality, where they see someone in need. They see someone in need and they think, well, that's what government welfare is for. They hear about crime and they say that's what police are for. They hear about, oh, somebody might invade us, which is usually a total lie. And they think, well, that's what government military is for. They think like children, where every problem is somebody else's to deal with and always authorities to deal with, not their neighbor, not their friends, not the random people, but the special people who went to authority and say, can I be your enforcer? Can I have a badge that says I am a piece of this thing called the law and authority and government? And so the indoctrination continues, and we think we grow up, but you don't. There's one kind of person who's actually grown up. They're called anarchists. And again, there's these paradoxes in people's brains where they have this indoctrination, but part of them knows it's insane. And when Amanda and I do our candles in the dark process, the entire point is to help people see the conflict already in their own head. You don't have to give them your values and your moral code. You just have to find within them the thing that already contradicts the authoritarian garbage they were taught. One way I did this, it was years ago, in an event I called Escaping the Myth. I'd have a group of people. I did a few different sizes, and I said, let's pretend, and there's political left, political right, a few anarchists sprinkled in there. And I said, most of us are strangers. We don't know each other. Let's pretend we're the whole world. We just got shipwrecked on an island. There's enough natural resources. We're not going to immediately die. How are we going to deal with these things? And I would walk through the mental exercise of suppose this happened and suppose that happened. What would we do to deal with it? Intentionally setting up a scenario where they don't have a 911 to call. They don't have a government. They don't have an authority to defer to. They don't have an opportunity to be irresponsible children. And those discussions are so insightful and interesting to watch, because I don't point out anything about government. I just say, it's just us. What are we going to do about it? And people have these very thoughtful discussions. One of the examples is I say, let's say we're on this island a while, and then we figure out one among us is stealing from the others. Like somebody either has stuff or caught a fish, and now we have a fish thief who stole it. It's like, well, what do we do about it? There is an immediate and necessary discomfort dealing with such a problem. And it is that discomfort that makes people want it to be somebody else's problem. Let authority handle it. I don't want to be the one who has to figure out what to do about this person who's a thief, or this person who's drunk off his gourd, or this person who committed fraud, or this person who's just kind of not paying attention and being negligent. I don't want to be the grown up. I don't want it to be my responsibility. We need a government to do it. But if you set out a scenario in which there isn't that, suddenly a lot of people, for the first time in their lives, think and act like responsible adults. They don't go to the stupidest solution to every problem, which is government violence. They think about it in terms of, all right, we're all just people. What do we do about this? And then you start talking and you start communicating. It's like the teacher left the room and never came back. Ooh, crap. Now we have to figure out what the hell we're doing. Like people. And so, for example, I'll do these little exercises and have the group talking about it. And somewhere in there, I'll throw in a suggestion of the government solution, and it's so stupid that every time, literally, people laugh at it. I say, we're figuring out how to deal with, well, what about, water? We know to go collect water, or building huts, or protecting against the thief, or whatever it is. And I say, well, how about we just choose one person and we decide that he tells the rest of us what to do and we have to obey, and he has the right to hurt us if we don't. People go, what? No, what kind of stupid suggestion is that? It's the suggestion that 99% of the world uses to solve 99% of the world's problems. Because they were taught that that's sane. They were taught it's necessary. They were taught that it's legitimate, and it's utterly loony. And they only believe that because of the indoctrination. And again, you can watch their brains dance around to try to ignore things that they already actually know. One is they will talk about, well, people, when you suggest a society that doesn't have a ruling class, they'll say, well, people are naturally pack animals, and they work together, and we organize, and we form hierarchies, and we find consensus and stuff. And I'm like, yeah? Well, that's government. No, it freaking isn't. And you know it freaking isn't. You know it has nothing to do with consensus, but the statist will reinforce the lie he was taught to make himself feel better about it. To make it so he can actually imagine that working together and organizing in cooperation is government. And it takes like 3 questions to say, okay, so government says you have to give us some money for this bridge that goes nowhere. What happens if you disobey? And then suddenly they face the fact that it's violent. They know it. Part of them knows it's violence from the very beginning, but they don't want to admit it. They don't want to see it. So the way they describe it is repeating the propaganda they were taught. And what we do in Candles in the Dark is to try to get them to see that, no, you actually know what it really is. And the reason you describe it in the fluffy and accurate way is because the literal reality makes you uncomfortable. And it's very important and it's very good that that is the case, because it shows that it doesn't match the moral code of the vast majority of human beings. They don't want to say it out loud. One of the main things we focus on in Candles in the Dark when talking to somebody is don't talk in abstract, vague policy fluff. Make it literal and specific and personal. Don't say, well, I think guns should be restricted to those who've blah, blah, blah. All right, that's nice. If I have a gun and the government says I'm not allowed to, I didn't threaten anyone, I didn't hurt anyone, but I still have one, they say I'm not allowed to, and I still do, what do you advocate be done to me? And they will immediately become uncomfortable, and their brain will immediately jump to something, well, there have to be consequences for breaking the law, and, if you break the law, they'll arrest you. I'm aware of that. That's not what I asked. I didn't ask what would happen to me. I asked what you want to happen to me. What do you advocate happen to me? And the fact that statists so often flounder around and don't want to say it out loud is because they know it's wrong. Their conscience tells them it's wrong. They don't want to admit what they suddenly realized they have been cheering for. And again, that is a very good sign, because that's what we have to feed and nurture and bring out of them. The part of you that feels bad about admitting what government is, that's called a voluntarist. The crap you were taught on top of that, that is what has to be done away with. Because what almost everybody really is deep down inside is a voluntarist, such that my original silly back and forth, everyone would think that's ridiculous. Nobody would ever do that, even though statists really do argue something that is that ridiculous, especially when it comes to protection. We need a giant thieving thug to protect us from thieving thugs. People try to hide from themselves beliefs that make them uncomfortable. And the more you can bring it out of them, the more you can make them reconsider what they are actually condoning, the better chance there is that they will choose the morality that is inside them over the indoctrination that somebody else has smashed in their heads. And it's very important to keep that in your mind when talking to them, that all these people, the vast majority, even if they're out there vociferously demanding this or that authoritarian injustice, they are also victims of this lie. They are victims of the authoritarian garbage that says, well, we need this, and it's righteous if it's law. And it's very easy to forget that, especially if they're there advocating something like profoundly evil, like the war on drugs. Oh, lots of people have habits we don't like. Let's send SWAT teams through the front door and maybe shoot them or put them in a cage. That's insane and evil. And the only reason anybody advocates it is because they were taught that, well, if you do it by law and legislation and by authority, then it's perfectly okay. But they don't like to be specific and they don't like to be literal because their moral code tells them that's wrong. And their view of reality, they talk in the same fluff they were taught. For example, the concept of laws. They have this vague notion in their head of we need law. Well, what does that mean and why do we need it? Well, people, we don't want people running around robbing and killing each other. I agree. I don't want that either. And by the way, most people who do that because law told them to do that. But we don't want that. And they think there's some magical, mystical thing that isn't really people that's going to keep all us mere humans in line and make us not do that. Again, this is something that they understand and they don't understand at the same time. Because if you ask them, well, what is government? Well, it's the representative. Eventually they'll say, well, it's people, and their laws they're just issuing commands, and people with guns hurt people who disobey. You can walk them through questions and show that they already knew that, but they don't think that way, and they don't feel that way, and they don't perceive it that way. They perceive it as something fundamentally different. But getting back to the fact that people naturally have way better solutions than government ever does. First of all, way more moral solutions, because they don't start with, let's have a big violent thug. But also more practical solutions, and solutions that actually work. Because if people are looking at a problem and they actually, like, we don't want to be victimized by the thief, or we don't want poor people starving to death, we want to help them out. It starts with good intentions, and if you don't add violence, there's nothing to corrupt. Like, power corrupts. A lack of power doesn't corrupt. So it's the whole notion of the ring of power of, well, if you put me in charge, I'll do good things with it. And gee, why does that always go in the wrong direction? Whereas if people realize, I'm just the boss over me and you're just the boss over you, and same is true of everybody else, so that when we address these problems and we don't start with the template of authoritarian power, we don't want innocent people to suffer. Duh. That's true of the vast majority of people. And so when people talk, well, what if there were just gangs and they'd have shootouts and blah, 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 blah. When people picture a reality without government and they start to imagine that that would mean that we're just all going to be violent animals, it's utterly ridiculous. Like, we'll take the example of protection. Right now, most of what law enforcers do is rob or cage people for victimless crimes. In other words, they start a fight and steal people's money and put them in cages. That is the vast majority of what law enforcers do. Now, in the movies and on TV, they pretend that what they do is bravely chase down the bad guys. And every once in a blue moon, they'll catch an actual bad guy and maybe even stop him. Well, they rarely stop him in the process. All right, we'll put you in a cage. And then, by the way, we'll rob a bunch of people to give you free room and board for having murdered somebody. It's like, okay, you can't really get a worse solution than that. But normal people wouldn't do that. And if somebody is accused of doing something bad, at least the thoughtful people would like, if he really did that, like, I want something to stop him from doing that. However, I also want to make sure he really did that before he gets punished. I don't want to just, well, somebody said that, somebody said that, somebody said he did something bad. We have built within us, when we're trying to be moral human beings, the only checks and balances that do any good. Like, I'm angry, but I want to be fair. And I'm outraged at this thing I heard about, but I want to pause for a minute and make sure it's actually like that I actually know what's going on. And, obviously people aren't always completely careful with that. But when you add power and imaginary authority to that carelessness, you don't just get, whoops, somebody got beat up because of a rumor or somebody spent a lie. You get literally hundreds of millions of people dying. And when you can look at history like that and still have so many people say, without government, there would be chaos and death and mayhem. Open a history book. With government, there's literally been hundreds of millions of people dying from their own government. But people are, again, it's about being trained to think like children, where the thought of being in that classroom and the teacher leaves and you don't know what to do, the thought of freedom is scarier to them than the thought of being subjugated by somebody else is in charge. All I have to do is obey them and everything will be okay. Never mind that, no, it won't be okay. It won't be anywhere near okay. It'll be as not okay as you can possibly get. And you look up all the least okay things that have ever happened in the history of the world were almost always a direct result of an authority giving an evil command and a bunch of statists obeying it and implementing it and enforcing it. And yet people still have this childish mentality that says, this classroom would be chaos if we didn't all listen to the teacher. What if you grow up and listen to your conscience instead, and that doesn't occur to most people? But when they're forced into a situation where they have to think about it, like if there wasn't a war on drugs, or you're not dumb enough to call the police because you have a friend with an addiction problem, nobody says, well, I know, I'll point a machine gun in his face. Like, no. Almost nobody is that stupid, except cops. Say, all right, we don't want them to hurt other people. We don't want them to hurt themselves. How do we address this? Same thing with helping the poor. Same thing with education. Same thing with, a zillion different problems. And the difference in the way people talk when the responsibility is on them, like, what would you do about this, is difference between night and day. Because when they talk about government solutions, they say things like, what would you do about this problem of there are some people who are sick and stuff and they can't afford health? Well, I want free health care. Well, I want rainbow unicorns sprinkling free money. What does that mean? Well, I want them to be given free stuff. From who? From the people. From government? Okay, where did government get it? They speak in fluff because they think in fluff, because if they don't, they feel bad about it. And one simple approach will make almost any statist uncomfortable, which is, if you actually advocate something, at least have the spine to say it. And just trying to get a statist to do that will make almost every one of them uncomfortable. Just get them to literally say what it is. Now, when people are responsible for their own actions, they don't do that. Like, for example, if I'm talking about if somebody breaks into my house with an axe in the middle of the night, I'm going to shoot him. I'm not going to say, well, I will implement some deterrent policy that I think is approved. No, I will literally describe, I will shoot you if you are a threat to the life of me and my family. So why is it that when all the statists advocate government solutions, the one wrong answer to everything, they always speak in terms of fluff? When you say, oh, what do you want done with the poor? A grand total of 0 statists will give the first description as, I want men with guns to threaten violence against all those people, to force them to hand over money and then give some of that to the poor. That is what every advocate of the welfare state condones and advocates, and it's what absolutely none of them will honestly admit, even to themselves. And that's the important part, because if you can bring it up to the surface to the point where they have to see it in themselves that, ooh, that really is the reality of it, then they get uncomfortable. One of the easiest ways to do that is when it comes to gun control. Gun control being a euphemism for gun violence, which most of us understand, and most of the people in the world will be like, what? No, gun violence is what we're against. Okay? You're against gun violence. So there I am in my home with my AR-15, not threatening anyone, not shooting anyone. In fact, it's in a safe. What do you want done to me? Well, there have to be consequences. Again, they do the tap dance. A half hour later, it suddenly dawns on them, gun control means sending men with guns into your living room to drag you away or shoot you because you have the same kind of gun as the guy I just asked to go into your living room to point a gun at you. Like, when it gets literal, nobody can say it with a straight face. And yet when it's not, when it's in the realm of fluff, there are so many peacenik leftists that feel perfectly fine about saying, I'm an advocate of gun control. Because they're unaware of the fact that what they're literally saying is, I'm an advocate of men with guns coming to you and threatening to kill you if you don't disarm. Oddly, none of them want to say it that way. And none of them want to think about it that way, because they don't want to see the answer, the solution that they're actually advocating. The belief in government is a mental crutch. It's what we do to be lazy and irresponsible and stupid. Because if you think something is justified, you don't need to ask somebody else to do it. You might hire, you might think, I have the right to do this. I have the right to mow my lawn, so I have the right to hire somebody else to do it. Every single person who votes for government, any size, any flavor, any kind, doesn't matter. Every single one, the reason they do that is because they want government to do things that they know would be immoral if they did them themselves. And that was absolutely true of me too. And on the other hand, if you think authoritarian power is legitimate, you are going to use it. You are going to cheer for the initiation of violence. If you think the ring of power is good and you're wearing it, it's like, well, now I get to be in charge, you're going to be a violent psycho. You can't not be. You cannot believe in government and not advocate immorality. You literally have to advocate immorality if you advocate government. And the reason they put so much fluff on top of describing what they condone is because deep down inside, part of them knows they're cheering for evil. And the little island exercise I use is one of my favorite ways to get people to think like adults. And what's very encouraging about those is that very quickly you'll see that most people, even if they're not all that educated, maybe they're not even all that smart, maybe they don't know each other, but they immediately go into the mode of, all right, well, how do we deal with this? How do we act as responsible adults? Because you've taken away the crutch. It's like, but I've walked my whole life on the crutch of authority will fix it. Well, too bad. Now you have to think like a grown-up. And just that exercise demonstrates the potential of humanity. Just trying that with people demonstrates these are people I could get along with really easily. We could peacefully coexist really easily if they hadn't been indoctrinated into believing in the one wrong answer to everything. So basically, to sum it up, what statism is being an irresponsible, irrational, immoral, bratty child. And it doesn't matter how many layers of fluffy rhetoric you use, it doesn't matter how nice your suit is, and how dishonest your rhetoric and spin is while you're describing the government violence you advocate. While anarchism, or more specifically voluntarism, is being a grown-up. It's recognizing, all right, I'm me, you're you, we shouldn't be, attacking each other. How do we figure this out? How do we deal with this? And it's necessarily uncomfortable. And it makes people want to run back to being caged animals. Animals that have grown up all their lives in a cage. A lot of them, if you open the cage, they'll back away. I'm not going out there. That is humanity. Humanity is domesticated livestock that's been trained to fear freedom and instead believe in the stupidest answer to almost every problem. The indoctrination that people are bombarded with, which is just constant, not only has to legitimize authoritarian domination, it has to delegitimize voluntary cooperation and organization. So government has to try to convince people, you can't possibly care for the poor. There's so many of them. Or you're just so greedy you're not going to do it. We have to come up with some reason why the sane, rational, moral answer isn't going to work, and they will insist to you that'll never work. And we can't trust you to have guns to defend yourselves. There would be shootouts in the street over every fender bender because you're all stupid, violent animals. You need us controlling you and giving these solutions and giving these answers because it would be chaos without us. So a project that I'm just now completing is a little booklet called What Anarchy Isn't. And it's a little animated or a little illustrated thing, full color. It's almost like a comic book. Very basic explanations that anybody can follow. It's 40 pages and it's about this big. And it's made to mass produce and print a whole bunch of them so you can just hand it out and leave them lying around. One big benefit of that is as soon as you talk to somebody, if they feel like, oh, you're trying to talk me into something and your ideas sound weird, they're likely to try to put up a wall and get into an argument and stuff. Whereas if they just find something lying around, some little colorful thing like, wait, what the heck's this? Their mind is way more likely to be at least receptive enough to see, wait, what even is this? And it's a very, In one sense, it's sort of like a kindergarten explanation. Unfortunately, when it comes to philosophy, the whole world is basically at the kindergarten level because they've been taught such garbage and not allowed to actually think about things like self-ownership and non-aggression, which should be patently obvious to everybody. So they need it at that low level. So we're making these and spreading them around all over the place. If you want to find me afterwards, I have a thing with a QR code where you can scan it and you can see the entire contents of this little booklet thing and download it for free, and you can share the PDF. But we really wanted to make the printed version because I think that lying around all over the place, first of all, imagine you're one of the control freaks at the top and you know that thing's lying around, and one at a time your subjects are going to go, kind of sounds like what I want. Thought it was chaos and mayhem. Because, like I said, they have to legitimize their one really stupid answer and delegitimize the thousands of rational answers. And that main focus of trying to get people to think in terms of a central master plan is so key to it. Because, again, that's getting people to think like irresponsible children. What is the teacher going to do about blah, 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 blah? And as long as they have a promise, don't worry, the teacher has a plan. Okay, then it's not my problem, it's not my responsibility, never mind. And so many statists, when they start to see the idea of a stateless society, they're like, but how would we do stuff? You're one of us. You're one of the people who has to figure out how we do stuff and gets to decide how we do stuff. And you get to decide what things you're going to support and how you're going to help your fellow man and how you're going to protect yourself or organize to protect other people or whatever it is. But the discomfort of being grown up makes a big disincentive for people to want to even think about it because they've been trained to be domesticated livestock. But it's so important just to point out that the foundation of statism and authoritarianism really is as ridiculous and insane as my silly little skits that I started this with. It really is that ridiculous. When people advocate any government solution, they really are advocating having a small number of people with the right to violently dominate and rob the rest of us. That is the literal reality of it. And just getting people to see that, which is a huge challenge, but if you can just get people to see that, you'll start to get them to see that government is the one wrong answer to absolutely everything.